This is a follow-up video to the work and career video I've released already. I think I titled it for YouTube, Retired Homeschool Mom Goes to Career Counseling. In that video, I was explaining why I was going to career counseling. Short story, I just finished my master's and I'm at a what's next stage. And also in that video, I was talking through the document that I prepared in advance of going to career counseling, because I wrote a document, because writing documents is what I do. I was sharing that with you, and we got to the point in the document where I was about to talk about education, the importance of education in this story of work and career. Hi there, my name is Renee Tuga. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This video is one in a series of videos about work and career. So let's just jump into it. That's really what this document was that I got ready for the career counseling session. This was like kind of the story of my work life, my work experience, maybe my work values, some of my skills and strengths. We're now at the point in the story where I'm going to talk about education. And this section is titled Education, mine, or like my own education, my educational practice, and my interest in education broadly. So I earned a bachelor's degree in education in 1999. That is 26 years ago from the summer of filming this. However, I never worked as a teacher in the school system, either public or private, because I became a stay-at-home parent immediately after graduating. And I mean immediately, like within a month after graduating. So I was pregnant during that last year of university. And we had already decided to homeschool our kids while I was studying for my degree in education. A kind of interesting story is that because I had just given birth, like a month before my convocation for my bachelor's, our oldest was born in May, my convocation ceremonies were in June, beginning of June, like 3 weeks after I had given birth and I had a newborn. There was no way I was going to those ceremonies. I had no desire, no interest. I totally switched over to being a mother at that point. My university experience was like part of this previous part of my life, and now I was a mother. So I didn't even want to go. But here's the interesting thing. So I missed that convocation, but I recently did attend the convocation for my master's degree.
Renee Tuga.
And this kind of sweet irony is that that same week was that same child who I was at home like nursing during my first convocation. They also graduated. Our oldest child convocated from their undergraduate degree. At Concordia University, and I convocated at the same school, and we weren't in the same ceremony, but we were on the same week. For me, that made the whole experience, my own convocation for my master's and their convocation for their undergraduate, it made the whole experience just that much more meaningful because it was 26 years ago that they were born, and I missed my convocation because I was home taking care of them and being a mother to them. And anyways, I like that story. Okay, so moving right along. Since my undergraduate years, I have thought deeply and cared profoundly about educational theories, philosophy, and practice. I homeschooled in part. Mostly we homeschooled because we wanted a certain family culture and family life, but I also homeschooled because education really matters to me, and how we do education really matters to me, and I wanted to do that with my children. And so homeschooling allowed me to live these interests, my interests in ed theory, philosophy, and practice. It allowed me to live these interests, to create and nurture our family, and practice my own philosophy of education as my vocation. To be able to have a theory of education or a philosophy of education and put it into actual practice can be really difficult in a public or even private school setting, because you're constrained by so many external factors and systems and bureaucracies and institutional parameters. And I didn't have those as a homeschooler. I could really do my own thing. When I finished raising our children, of course, we both raised our children, but I was doing a big part of that labor. When I finished raising our children, I decided to pursue a master's degree in education because, like I said in my previous video, I did ed studies as a way to bridge the experience and education that I had for basically the first 20 years of my adult life. I was looking for a bridge from that to work related to education. I wanted to create a bridge to an education-related career that was not classroom teaching, but was more theoretically based. Specifically, in getting a master's degree, what I wanted was to somehow gain access to places where decisions are made about how our society educates our children and how we perceive and practice education more broadly even. So children and their education is just one part of education. Education is happening all over the place. And we do it a certain way in our society because of ideas we have about, well, to get really philosophical, what it means to be human and the meaning of life and all of that. That informs all of those practices downstream. We have ideas as a society about education in general. And I wanted to gain access to places where decisions are made about that. I lacked technical language for this. It's like intuiting something or having an idea about something and being able to explain it one way, but not having the official language around it. So that's what I'm saying. I lacked the official language around this. So how I expressed it when I was starting my master's, and I'm not sure if I put this on my application letter or if this was processing I did in addition to that. But I wrote this in a blog post. What I wrote in a blog post from December 2020, and I'll link that here, is that I want a seat at the table where people make decisions about education. I would now describe this as having an interest in education policy, which arises for me from an interest in education philosophy. What I've learned through my studies and through interacting with research and doing some research myself is that one way to have this influence is by doing and publishing research. I did not have this understanding before going into my program. Even though it's a master's program and you think, well, of course, that's what it's about. It's about learning how to do research. I did not have that understanding of things. I thought I was going into a program to learn things, engage in a learning process and be taught things and go dive deeper into ideas. I did not equate that with doing research and publishing research. The learning curve for me was very steep. Very interesting, but very steep in terms of understanding what grad school was all about. And so having gone through that degree, I now know that how you influence policy around education is with research. Other ways that you could influence education policy might be having employment within some kind of education institution, a school district, a ministry of education. So that's at the level of the provincial or state level where decisions are made about curriculum and how things are going to be taught. So those are all levels of having influence. I'm not even entirely sure of all the possible avenues, which was why I was going to career counseling, because I don't know where all these things are happening. I know that sitting around the table where decisions are made about education is the place, at least within society, that I would want to participate. So I'm very home-based and I want to build a certain life in my home. But if I'm going to be out in society and I'm going to be doing work that is beyond my home and family and out contributing something to the greater good, let's say, I want that to be around education. Having a seat at the table where people make decisions about education is what I call my big, hairy, audacious dream slash goal. There's a difference between dreams and goals. And, dreams are like these kind of ideas that then can become goals once we attach action to them. At least that's how I think of it. I am not like a coach or a self-help person or somebody who's going to tell you this is how to achieve your goals or this is how you move forward in things. I'm just talking about my own life here. The idea that I could influence education beyond just the education of my own children or beyond my own education and influence at some kind of policy level, that is like a big, hairy, audacious, as in it's like really out there. And I don't think it's possible necessarily. In fact, it's hard actually even to talk about it publicly, because it was even hard for me to like write it and talk about it to a career counselor, because honestly, I feel like, well, who am I to think that I'm qualified to do that? Well, that was part of getting the master's, because I actually want to be qualified. I want to have the qualifications, the credentials to do that, the training, the whatever, to get me into those spots. I feel a very strong sense of, well, who the hell do I think I am that I could have influence in society in this area? So that's why I call it like this big, hairy, audacious thing. And I don't think I'm going to reach it in some kind of like committee somewhere I don't even know what it would look like. Some large governing body that makes decisions about education and I have a seat at that table. I don't think that's actually a thing that I'm going to achieve. But I have to put out a goal for myself that I can work towards as this is the thing I'm aiming for. It's very large, but I don't have this ambition and drive and like climb some ladder to achieve that kind of thing. And I don't even know how you would achieve that kind of thing. But I have this direction that I'm oriented in. I recognize there are many tables where education decisions are made. And my scope is not overly specific about which levels of education, but I do feel fairly strongly about K through 12 education. So this is a good time to talk very briefly about my philosophy of education. I wrote a paper on that. It's not something I'm seeking to publish in a journal or anything, but it is available on my blog. My philosophy of education paper goes through the journey of how I arrived at that philosophy. It's not an instructive document that says, therefore, these kinds of education count and these kinds don't, or I'm in favor of this and not in favor of that. It's really the background and what is the driving idea, not specific detail. My philosophy of education rests on core philosophical axes. You can think of philosophical axes as the framework or foundation that underpin a philosophical system or theory or ideas, or as foundational principles that map the relationship between ideas. I think of my own philosophical axes like a Cartesian coordinate system with X and Y axes that define points in space, creating a line with a particular directionality, which I'm about to explain here. So these are my philosophical axes. Autonomy, freedom, self-determination, those are kind of grouped together, are the human drive and aim. And then relatedness and belonging are our state of being and existence in the world. And we're talking philosophy here, so that's an ontological claim. You could say maybe that this idea of autonomy, freedom, and self-determination is some kind of existential, it's the point of existence. I'm not sure the exact philosophical word for that, but that's kind of the thing we're oriented to in our existence. And then our relatedness and belonging is our ontological state. It's our state of being. So then, the directionality of freedom, and by directionality I mean we're always moving towards that as humans. We're moving towards autonomy, freedom, self-determination. We're seeking that out in some regard, okay? This changes culturally, so I don't want to get too deep into the weeds with that, but I am putting forth the idea that that is our directionality, okay? This directionality of freedom within our ontological condition of non-separation necessitates, predicates, and indicates a relational responsibility where self-sovereignty is oriented to the flourishing of all. What this simply means, if I could put it in simpler terms, I don't like always putting things in simpler terms because I don't want to gloss over the complexity of things. But to put it more simply, we're driving towards freedom, but the point of that freedom is the flourishing of all of us. Why we would be oriented that way or want to see that is because we are all connected. And with that comes that relational responsibility, comes a responsibility that our freedom is not just for our own personal goals and well-being and flourishing, it's for the flourishing of the whole. You may have noticed this is also a philosophy of life. In fact, this is a philosophy of life on which my philosophy of education rests. So education, if that's kind of how I see the world, education then works towards those aims. Voiceover Renee popping in here to say that I missed when I recorded this video saying that not only does education work towards those aims, but within my philosophy of education, those things are also the means. So what I mean by that is that the development of freedom, autonomy, self-determination, those are the means by which we do education. They're not something that you achieve at some later point after you've gone through an appropriate amount of development or an appropriate amount of being told what to do. They are the way it is done. Similarly, our fundamental connectedness and relatedness and how that calls us then to care for one another and to have responsibility for one another, those are also the means. They are not an end that is achieved after developing a sense of disconnection, a sense of competition and inequality amongst each other, understanding ourselves as fundamentally relational, connected, and belonging to one another. They are the how we do education. You'll maybe have noticed that in this philosophy of education, I say nothing about school subjects or what is to be taught. Those things are subject to these underlying principles of the freedom, autonomy, self-determination, and our fundamental relationality and our belonging to each other and our connectedness. What we teach should all be subject to that. The things we're trying to have our children or students, our young people learn would be things that would help them live those ideas. It's not about if I value math over art or whatever. It's about, does the teaching of this idea, this skill, this subject, does it meet the ends, and are our means, how we are doing it, aligned with those ends? This philosophy got its start in my undergraduate education and then grew in the dynamic, evolving, and intensely relational context and process of homeschooling, which allowed for a high degree of coherence between philosophy and pedagogy, which was very satisfying, like I've already talked about. I got to practice something I believed in without a lot of constraints, the constraints that a lot of teachers in a school system would experience. I'm having a change in the light here. So I'm gonna move to a different area in the yard so I don't have a bunch of shadows falling on me, and we're gonna pick back up with this. Is this gonna work in this new location? I think so. Let's continue on with finishing up and wrapping up philosophy of education. Talking about philosophy of life and philosophy of education is all very heady, intellectual, but practically speaking, the kind of education that my life philosophy informs and how I homeschooled my kids is not like the dominant education system of compulsory attendance, age-segregated classrooms, mandated curriculum, and hierarchical ordering of subject matter and relationships, to name just a few examples. That was a long sentence, holy moly. Okay, shortened and simplified. What I envision for education, how I practiced education, does not align and is not represented by the dominant education system. Because of the difference, or this huge gap between how I conceive of education, my beliefs about education, my both life philosophy and education philosophy, and how things actually are, that gap feels very huge to me. And that is why my dream to influence education and have a seat at a table where decisions are made about education feels so audacious. Not only is it audacious because, as I was talking about earlier, who am I to think that I qualify for that, or that my ideas are of value, or that I should influence? It's audacious also because my philosophical axes inform a way of living and educating that is very much contrary. I don't want to say against. I don't think of it as against, but it's like going a different direction than what exists. It's decidedly against maintaining and reproducing our society's social, political, and economic status quo. As for like what those kind of education models look like, I'm honestly less interested in detailing those, but I can kind of put them under certain umbrella frameworks or like under certain headings that they more align with. Big heading would be alternative education, broadly alternative education, and more specifically self-directed learning, interest-driven homeschooling and unschooling, relational and ethics of care education. So ethics of care is a philosophy, as well as anarchist education, democratic education models, and emancipatory education. And there's a variety of ways to practice and do education even within those different models that I just threw out there, or those different framings. I started grad school with the desire to direct my interest and experience in educational practices beyond family life and into broader society. So I've always been practicing a type of education and a type of relating within family life. And I wanted to move that interest and that experience and that heart to contexts that are outside of the family life and into broader society. And like I said earlier in the video, education is the context within society at large where I would like to contribute, be active, make a difference. But the kind of education that I want to participate in and that I could get behind and support only happens in the margins of education, and very much so in the margins of society. While I was in my grad program, I met with one of my professors who was like the equivalent of a supervisor in my program. I say equivalent of because I wasn't in a thesis program, which requires a certain kind of supervisor. It's all just very technical kind of language. It's basically he was my supervisor, but not in a thesis, not for a thesis. That context is just to explain that this was the professor that knew the most about me, that I had connected with the most. I had also done the most courses with, and I had the most interaction with him. And he had the most interaction with my ideas and my work. So my professor said, you know, what you would want to do is a PhD. because it would put me in the position to do and publish research that could influence policy in support of alternative education, as well as influencing educators themselves to take these principles into their classrooms, which is what happens in teacher training, teacher preparatory, university programs where future educators are being taught. They're being taught by professors who have done research, who are doing research, who have ideas about education. For many reasons, and I'm not going to get into them now, a PhD is not the path that I want to take at this point in my life. Some of the reasons for my hesitancy in pursuing a PhD will be explained or illustrated or made obvious, I should say, when I discuss my working context, which is a little later. We're almost to that point, which explains the place that paid work has in the whole of my life. And the PhD would have to fit into that paid work piece. And my paid work piece of my life is a piece. It's not the whole. And there's a lot of other things in my life. And it feels not possible to do a PhD and have all those other things in my life. However, what I really love about the idea is that it would provide the opportunity to do research and to write and publish about this thing that I care so much about, and in a way that could influence others. And just for an example of this, I published an article during my master's program. I published a paper to a journal. And although I found it really hard, because it's the first time I've done something like that, it was extremely satisfying because it felt like doing something towards the fulfillment of that big, hairy dream or goal that I have, because people have reached out to me. People are reading it. First of all, I was amazed. I thought, like, no one's going to read this thing in some academic journal, but people are reading it. People are finding out about it, and they contact me. That I get incredible satisfaction from knowing that people are reading and interacting with that, and maybe having my ideas influence their practice, how they do education. I haven't had any comparable income earning experiences where I've been able to pull together my intellect, my experience, my skills, and my passion for something that fulfills that big, hairy dream goal of mine. And so what is the right thing for me at this stage of my life? That brings me to the next part of this document, because I have a very fulfilling and fulfilled life. And the work piece, the paid work piece of my life is just one piece. And this is the part I'm trying to figure out right now. I'm trying to figure out the trajectory for my paid work, the path for my paid work, as one piece in an overall fulfilled and fulfilling and satisfying life. And so that is where I'm going to next. Okay, I've got myself a refreshing drink here. I've been talking for a long time. Lots of this will be edited out by the time you see it. So it hopefully won't feel like a long time to you, but gosh, it feels like I've been talking for a long time. So the next part of my preparation for my career counseling document moves away from education. Education, all those things, is a pretty big part of who I am. In one conception of my life, and in one way that I look about the future of my life and my work life, I want to work in education. I'd like to move in the direction of having paid work related to all that. And then this brings me to the discussion of where paid work fits into the rest of my life. The rest of my life is very fulfilling. I have a lot of satisfaction and fulfillment in my life. And so the question that I have as the section heading for this part of the document is a fulfilling life, and is more fulfillment possible? I've had big goals and dreams for the other aspects of my life: marriage and family life, vocational goals, lifestyle goals, and so many of these have been accomplished. But I can't seem to grab hold of or crystallize a vision for how I might achieve my big, hairy, audacious dream/goal for my income earning work. I also want good income earning work, and I want it to be aligned with my values where possible. So, I mean, there's that vision. but a vision for what that exactly looks like, I don't have one of those. Which is why I went to career counseling, right? At minimum, my income earning work needs to support these other things in my life. It needs to support the marriage goals, the family goals, vocational goals, lifestyle goals, as it currently does, in the fact that it brings in an income to support the aims of those other things in my life. At minimum, income earning needs to support these things, but ideally, my income earning work would be related to or an extension of my ongoing interest, experience, and education in education. Ideally, it would be related to everything I just was talking about. And this income earning work would help move me towards my big, hairy, audacious dream/goal to sit at a table where decisions are made about education. So I've used the word vocation in this document and just recently in talking here about my vocational goals. I use the word vocation, and this is what I mean by that. Vocation is work that reflects and is related to how I find and define meaning and purpose in my life. My primary vocations have been and are growing humans, which includes homeschooling, and mothering. So growing humans and mothering kind of go together. Family building, homemaking, memoirist writing, and other storytelling. Voiceover Renee popping in here to say, I think writing in general is vocation for me, not just memoirist and storytelling and communicating my life experiences through writing, which I feel very drawn to do and is what I'm also doing through video. But just writing in general feels like vocation for me. These are all relationship oriented for me and are also very creative. My paid work could be vocational. And what I mean by that is that it would fulfill how I find and define meaning and purpose in my life. My paid work also does not need to be vocational. In the scheme of what makes a good life, I have many of those things already established, already happening. So paid work would not have to necessarily meet the same level of satisfaction and fulfillment for me as those things have provided me, because I have so much satisfaction and fulfillment in those things. And I think it's perhaps a little unrealistic to expect that all these areas of our life can provide that level of meaning and purpose. I have a very rich and fulfilling life, and I also have some privilege in not having to work full-time to meet our immediate and future household needs. But ideally, and here again, this is another place where it feels really vulnerable to talk about this, because it feels very privileged and very entitled to talk about wanting so much from your life, to want even more than what is already very good. Having said that, I would like to have a trajectory for my employment for the next 15 years or so, where my paid work is more fulfilling and ideally related to education, as I've been discussing, and working towards that big, hairy, audacious dream/goal, even though I don't know exactly what that looks like. And if this is not possible, because really, not all things in life are possible, and I have a very fulfilling life already. If this is not possible, I can make peace with working in less than the most fulfilling kind of contexts. What really feels audacious, speaking of hairy, audacious things, is to think that somehow I would be entitled to more than what so many other people have that way. I have goals and things I'm working towards, but this is life. This is the real world. We make compromises. There's trade-offs at all these different points in our life, and work might be one of them for me. I could make peace with finding work in other contexts and capacities besides education and still have a very fulfilling life, and still possibly having very fulfilling work, because you just don't know how life takes you and what kinds of things are possible in these different areas that you maybe hadn't considered. So I know all of that, and I'm cognizant of all of that. But still, I do want to take steps in the direction of that big, hairy, audacious dream goal, because I'm capable of doing that. And so I want to take steps in that direction. So to sum up that section, I have a very fulfilling life, and the level of fulfillment has really ratcheted up a significant notch in moving here, which we did last summer. And in what we have going on here with my parents living next door and being at this stage of life, there's a lot of fulfillment and satisfaction. And I do ask, is more fulfillment possible? And what steps could I take to investigate that and achieve more of that? We are now at the last section of this document. Yay, finally made it here. This is kind of the context of work in my life and how paid work needs to fit into my life. And I've already mentioned that I work part-time, so I'm not looking for full-time work. That's part of it. But this is kind of to set I would say maybe the context and constraints for what kind of work is possible for me at this stage, or what kind of work I'd be looking for, or what I can commit to in paid work. Another way of framing it would be like freedom and flexibility, the freedom and flexibility I have, but also the constraints of my environment and the other responsibilities and goals in my life that determine what I want to do with my time, that makes it so that work has to fit into that. Here is my context or my constraints or my freedom and flexibility, however we want to word it. I want to keep working predominantly from home because this allows me to maximally express and practice my vocations. So I've already talked about my vocations, and they're very home-based, very relationship-based, very here-based. Working from home, I can do those things easier. Literally like step away from the desk to do something else that meets another goal of mine, another vision and dream of mine, and then do that and then step back into my work. And I love that. I should say step back into my paid work. So I want this flexibility of working remotely because of that, but also it gives me flexibility for traveling because I can work while traveling, and we've done that over the years, my husband and I, and we want to be able to continue doing that. Another piece of my context is that I live in Nova Scotia in a somewhat rural location. Proximity to like medium-sized towns and small towns with lots going on in them that might hold employment opportunities for me related to education. So this is a possibility. So there is local things happening, absolutely. But I also, living in Nova Scotia is a different context than living in a big city, for example. I've already mentioned that I work part-time and I want to keep my work to part-time hours. It feels like, if my paid work was really aligned with my vocation, those things that are deeply meaningful and purposeful to me, if it was aligned with that, or was somehow, working towards that big, hairy, audacious dream goal, I might be motivated to do more hours. That's a possibility, right? Because you're like, wow, this is so aligning with what I want out of life. That has not been my experience so far with paid work. Like I've written here, my vocations are very fulfilling to me, and so I'm really drawn to them. I want to do them. They are compelling to me. I want the time to do them. I want the time to pursue those. And so paid work has to exist in its own time. I need to also consider the earning potential of whatever it is I'm doing. And that is that's a reality. And that's why you might not always be able to align the big, hairy, audacious dream goal thing with paid work if that work can't yield the kind of income that you need or want. And when it comes to my interest in education, that is a big concern because education isn't like a field where people make a lot of money. And I'm not interested in making a lot of money. I want to make enough, and I want to be paid well for the time that I spend. I want to be paid well for my work. And sometimes that's not always possible within places like alternative education. And speaking that out loud it's really interesting because people who pursue work in business and finance, in those areas of our society that feel like the movers and shakers of our economy, people pursuing work in those, they expect to be paid well. They don't mind talking about being paid well and prioritizing that. And this is a curious thing for me to evaluate and examine in myself about how it's difficult to want to be paid well for relational work. And the reason that I want that is because I live in a world in which you need money to have the things that you need. And so I want to be paid well for the work I do to achieve those things. But the kinds of fields that I'm interested in typically don't pay well, especially when they are things that are practiced at the margins or edges of culture and society. I find that tension really interesting. That's all I'm going to talk about it here. I'm not going to discuss that much more here, except to say I do want to be paid well for my work because of what we live in and the system that we live in and the financial needs that we have in our life. Another thing from my working context is that I am not particularly entrepreneurial in terms of having a vision for a business that I would start up providing a service or product. I am self-employed right now. I do freelance work for clients, but that's not a particularly entrepreneurial endeavor. I'm not building a business of being a freelancer. I do freelancing as my work. So I'm not particularly entrepreneurial, full of ideas for business and how to make money from those and things I could sell. But I am service, relationship, and story oriented. So I come to working relationships with how can I help you? How can I help you in your development? How can I help you in your product and service vision? And I also like telling my own story and participating in other people's stories. Okay, that is the end of what I'm sharing from this career counseling preparation document. I also, at the end of this document, I did a little bit of a strengths assessment and talked about skills, and I'm not going to go into that here. In putting together this document for career counseling, this was less for the career counselor and more for me. It was really a self-reflective exercise so I could know better about what I'm looking for and who I am. It wasn't like the career counselor and I poured over this together. It was that I had written this and I knew this in my head going in. Okay, so the question here now is, so what came out of that? What came out of the career counseling? So here's what I went into career counseling looking for. I would like a meaningful, values-aligned, decent income earning work trajectory that I can pursue for the next 15 or so years. I am coming to career counseling to get help identifying jobs and paid working roles positions along that path. My next video is going to be about how the career counselor advised me based on all this stuff and our conversation together. It's going to be on what they said, what she said. And then I'm going to go into the journaling that I did on my own later. I have reframed things a little bit. All of that will be in the next video. So this video is ending here and we're done with this career counseling preparation document. If you're interested in following along with what becomes of all this and what comes up next in this story, make sure to subscribe. A couple questions I have for you would be, do you have a life philosophy? Have you written it or articulated it somehow, or is it just internalized mostly? Also, how do you think of paid work in the scheme of the rest of your life? And how do all those pieces fit for you into the big picture of your life? Those are things I would love to hear from you in the comments or anything else that you have to share. Thanks for watching. I will see you next time.